Thank you. So I'm interested in why it is that people believe what they believe. And I actually got interested in that topic when I encountered people who believe some rather strange things. Here are some of them. There are people who believe that other people are conspiring to harm them. And there are people who believe that they're being harmed even by supernatural forces. There are people who believe that their loved ones are cheating on them, that their behavior is being controlled by powerful people, that thoughts are being inserted into their minds, or maybe taken out of their minds. In contrast, there are people who have wildly other strange beliefs, that they're very, very powerful. They've got supernatural abilities. They can fly. They've got significant religious importance, or that their status is somehow enhanced by connection to somebody I had a big crush on when I was a teenager. There are people who believe there's something terribly wrong with them, that they're falling apart, that they're dead. There are people who have strange ideas about other people and themselves, that they see strangers in the mirror when they shave every morning, that they're responsible, they're guilty for terrible things that happen in the world, that the world is itself, in some sense, artificial, that they're being given special messages from the television or from other occurrences in the world. And some of these strange beliefs are apparently unique to certain parts of the world. These are called culture-bound syndromes. So in Singapore, there was, not long ago, an outbreak of people who believed that their penises were being absorbed into their bodies and would go to the emergency room with family members clutching their genitals, because when the organ was absorbed into the body, death would follow. In India, there are people who believe that if they're bitten by a dog, they can become pregnant with puppies. There are women in Saudi Arabia who believe that they're being buried alive in sand. And there are people in North America, but in lots of other places too, I discovered, who believe that everything in the world is an act. Everything is artificial. It was created for them, that their life is like the life of the character in the film The Truman Show. This is a delusion I've worked on. So there are people with very, very strange beliefs, and these beliefs are known, no doubt you've figured it out, as delusions. Delusions are not illnesses. They're not psychiatric or neurological illnesses. They're symptoms, and they're very common, surprisingly. They're symptoms of some 75 different psychiatric illnesses, neurological illnesses. They can be very long-standing. They can come and go very, very quickly. And in people with certain illnesses, most notably schizophrenia, which is the worst, most devastating of the psychotic illnesses, people who have delusions have what appears to be hundreds or thousands of strange beliefs about the world. But delusions can also appear in an isolated sort of island of irrationality. It's not uncommon, actually, for people with Alzheimer's disease or in the early stages of other sorts of dementia to have these strange, isolated beliefs that you'd never know they had unless you got onto that particular issue. Some of these involve, as I said a moment ago, other people, the identities of other people, and the best known of these is the Capgras delusion, named after a 19th century neurologist. And the Capgras delusion is the belief that someone you know, often a loved one, is a duplicate. They've been replaced by a duplicate. And so there are lots and lots of anecdotes in the literature about a man who will wake up one morning and say, she looks like my wife, sounds like my wife, but she's not my wife. And this is often the very first sign that something is terribly wrong. Now, one of my heroes, a man called Karl Jaspers, who was a 20th century psychiatrist and philosopher, wrote a great deal of very influential things about delusions. And he thought that some delusions, the main ones in fact, kind of appeared out of nowhere. And they had no connection to anything else in the mind. And as a result, they were, as he put it, ununderstandable. They were just these phenomena that were bizarre that you had to take as fundamental. Now, even though Jaspers is a hero of mine, I'm going to disagree with him in this talk. I'm going to suggest that we can begin to understand where delusions come from. And what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is tell you something about what I think about this issue. Now, people who have thought about this question have had some general strategies for thinking about how delusions come about. One strategy is to suppose that sometimes when your brain is disordered, that leads to some very strange experiences. So suppose there's something wrong with your emotional responses, and you wake up and you see your wife, but you don't have the same warmth, the same feeling of affection that you normally do, and you might wonder why that is, and you might come up with this bizarre hypothesis, namely that you're not responding to her as you normally do because it's not her. You know? A second strategy is to think about reasoning. People with delusions do reason in a slightly different way from other people. And the thought about what could be going wrong is something like this. Suppose my wife has a haircut. She comes home and she looks a little different, but I don't notice exactly what's different about her. Now, the natural thing to say is, well, she's done something. She's put on a new dress. Maybe she's had a haircut. Something's slightly changed. But if I'm not reasoning correctly, I might think, well, she doesn't look the same. I suppose that's good evidence that she's not the same. And you get a delusion. Now, I think these strategies are not successful. And the way I think about delusions is in terms of what I'm going to call content, which is to say, I want to ask what delusions are about. What do they talk about? So let's go back to my list of strange beliefs, and I'm going to just focus on the first few, mostly for reasons of time. Look at the ones in green. Notice, first of all, that they're all about people. So people who are afraid of things when they're delusional are not afraid of being swallowed up by an earthquake or being struck by lightning or running out of money or something. They're afraid of what other people might do to them. And so that first delusion, you may know, is called a paranoid delusion or a persecutory delusion. So delusions are about other people, and the ones in green are all about, they're not all persecutory delusions, but they're all about how other people can be dangerous, how they can be threatening, how they can harm us. The second set of strange beliefs in yellow are a kind of counterbalance to that. They're not fears about other people, they're sort of fantasies about how powerful I might be, and therefore how I might, I say, protect myself against powerful people. People who are themselves powerful tend to be victimized less often, right? So what do we know then? We know, first of all, that delusions are about people, and they're mostly about worrying about the threats that other people pose, and as I say, fantasizing about how to defend against those threats. And that makes sense, because human beings live fundamentally in a world of other people. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? If I live among other people, I can do things that I can't do by myself. I can come to a meeting like this, and I can exchange ideas, and we can build buildings like cégeps. I certainly can't do that by myself. But of course, there are risks associated with living among other people too. If I live in a cave with my family, then I can't come to meetings like this, but I also don't have to worry about my wife cheating on me with Brad Pitt, because there is nobody around like Brad Pitt. In fact, there's nobody around other than me. She's stuck with me. So living among other people gives us benefits, but it also raises the risk of exploitation. And what I want to suggest is that delusions are beliefs that we have when a particular part of our mind-brain that's devoted to detecting the risks of exploitation has gone wrong. So my brother is a psychiatrist. He's called Joel Gold, and he and I have developed the hypothesis that there's a part of our mind that we call the suspicion system. And it's literally a system that evolved to be sensitive to dangerous other people. So it's a system that should turn on in all of you when you see a face like the one in front of you. What's going on when you see that face is somewhere in your brain an alarm is going off saying, that's somebody, better avoid it, right? If you want to go to a meeting with someone, if you want to build a cégep, that's probably not a good person to do it with. That, I think, is the suspicion system active. And it's active in a healthy and adaptive way. In people who have a suspicion system that's not functioning properly, I'm hypothesizing, in effect, that the fears go haywire, and you get all sorts of wild ideas, and the fantasies about how to defend against those threats also go haywire, and you get fantasies about being able to fly, and Meryl Streep being in love with you, and so on. So delusions, then, are disorders that arise in a part of your mind, brain, that actually is a very useful, very adaptive thing to have in an environment where other people are always around. But when it goes wrong, you wind up with some pretty strange beliefs. So to conclude, before I summarize the talk, let's just have a little test of your suspicion system. This is free of charge, and here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you 3 faces in succession. You're only going to see the faces very, very briefly, okay? And the question I want you to answer is, which face is trustworthy and which face is not, okay? So I'm going to show you the faces. Have a look at the little fixation cross there. That's where the faces will appear. And as I say, you'll see them one after another, but only very briefly. You ready? Here we go. One, which face is the most trustworthy? Who says the first? Second? Third? There you go. So whoever didn't put their hand up should go see a neurologist. Okay, you're all absolutely right. They're the faces. They're actually synthetic faces. They're not real. They were designed by a very brilliant psychologist called Alexander Todorov at Princeton. And they're designed precisely to look more or less trustworthy. Now, notice the interesting thing. They're almost indistinguishable, except for the angle of the eyebrows and the slight angle on the sides of the mouth. Now, you saw those faces for a few thousandths of a second. And yet, you were able not just to see them, but to see which one was the one that you should approach and which one you should stay away from. That, I say, is the suspicion system functioning adaptively. So, as I said at the beginning, much as I admire Karl Jaspers, I disagree with him. I don't think delusions arise out of nowhere. I don't think they're simply something out of nothing. I think they're quite explainable, quite understandable. They are, in my view, one of the prices that we all pay for living with other people. Thank you.